Okay, so this is the beginning of page 7 of the lyric Nostalgia. So remember that the last thing we talked about is that the lyric is privy, which means has access to a secret about even divine love, that even divine love longs for incarnation. So even the gods want to be seen, right? This earthly paradise is the region in which Dante climbs at the summit of Mount Purgatory, an image instilled in the limbic core of the brain, unreachable by scientific probing. Dante envisions it as the ultimate goal of earthly life. Virgil, his predecessor, his tradition, leads him to this original garden, and it is here that he encounters the beauty his heart has been seeking. Highlight. Beatrice's radiant but forbidding presence enables the pilgrim to know himself and thus be cleansed of his flaws. It is of this realm that T.S. Eliot speaks when he describes a condition of stillness, serenity, stillness, and reconciliation, into which poetry conducts us and then leaves us, as Virgil left Dante, when that guide can avail us no further. Stop. And indeed, the poetic ancestors, the Virgils, cannot take the poet on into the celestial regions. Dante requires different mentors for that perilous journey, Beatrice and Saint Bernard, beauty and spiritual wisdom. But to come this far into the poetic region seems, on the contrary, to be going back to primal innocence. The pilgrim regains the wholeness of the human race, becoming like Adam and gazing at Beatrice, his Eve, with the fullness of love. Many poets have written about this earthly paradise, but Frost's entire body of poetry is an exploration of this Frost's entire body of poetry is an exploration of the psychic space just outside the garden, where the memory of blessedness is a constant reproach. Stop. His poems exist in a moment before civilization, when humankind and nature are still close. Man and woman are still blaming each other for the loss of the garden. Work is just beginning to be turned into a blessing and not a curse. The line of dark trees hiding unknown territory, the presence of evil in the new design, the white spider on a white leaf, the sound of Eve's voice echoed by the birds, all of these speak of a fallen world, an exile. Frost attests to this fall quite overtly in his play on words in the poem The Oven Bird. The solitary singer, a midsummer and midwood bird, tells us that for flowers, midsummer is to spring as 1 to 10, and the prophecies of the coming of that fall we name the fall. The bird would cease and be as other birds, but that he knows in singing not to sing. The question that he frames in all but words is what to make of a diminished thing. Just the word, just diminished thing. The oven bird, remembering spring, is aware in midsummer of diminishment. He would cease singing entirely, except that he has mastered the art of not singing when he sings, for his entire song is not praise but disparagement. Circle disparagement. He sings in order to testify to the beauty and fullness he has known and to contrast it with what is before him. His song is a question much like that of the psalmist. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Psalms 137. How do we celebrate something that has lost its luster? Stop. All that is left of the original garden is Eve's voice in the song of the birds, and, as Frost writes in Directive, a broken chalice taken from a children's playhouse, and the language that, though now halting, once sprang spontaneously from Adam's mouth as he named the animals. It is in that original language, which can be recovered only with effort, that any kind of heart's ease is to be found for the lyric poet. Sometimes, however, in this remembered realm of innocence within the city, the poet himself is the false note. Sometimes he brings with him the serpent, as John Donne says in Twickenham Garden, and the tone becomes bitter and often cacophonic. Circle that word. It means echoey. It becomes an echo chamber. For either harshly or gently, the lyric rebels against the heart's violation everywhere to be found in civilization, where structures continue to expand like a Tower of Babel that confounds the common language of the heart. Keep highlighting. So the lyric poet is miserable in the city. One thinks of Blake's harsh castigation of London, in which he finds the streets chartered for industrial purposes. Stop. In this bleak world, even a natural thing like the river is harnessed for commercial use, with the soldiers' blood staining government walls and child labor casting a pall on the church. Circle Paul. Everyone in the city is weakened. Highlight. Everyone in the city is weakened, with lives made miserable by the unnatural regimentation and mercantilism of daily life. Stop. Love itself is bought and sold in midnight streets. One can hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights the plagues of the marriage hearse. The organic center of social life, the family, is afflicted by the damage done to the city's feminine victims and their consequent moral and physical disease. Highlight. By the early 20th century, the lyric is lonely and unheeded in the barrenness and alienation of urban life. Stop. Eliot writes in Preludes, the winter evening settles down with smell of steaks and passageways, 6 o'clock, the burnt-out ends of smoky days. Yet looking beyond the tawdry, circle tawdry, images of the city, the poet confesses, I am moved by fancies that are curled around these images and cling. Highlight the notion of some infinitely gentle, infinitely suffering thing. Okay, I want you to put a bracket around those two lines you highlighted and write the word us. Circle us. We are the infinitely gentle and infinitely suffering things. Is anybody else missing pages? We're on 9. What's that? Okay, come get another one. Something of the lyric nostalgia can be discerned underneath the apparent sordidness. Circle sordidness. Sordidness basically means dirtiness. Highlight. In fact, the city itself as a human community is infinitely gentle, suffering patiently its degradation. Stop. Alan Tate is more bitter and passionate in his castigation of the modern city in his poem Aeneas at Washington. Aeneas, who endured such hardships to found the new Troy, also called Rome, views what has become that civilization engendered by his struggles and remembers the destruction of another city. I stood in the rain, far from home at nightfall by the Potomac, the great dome with the water, the city my blood had built I knew no more, while the screech owl whistled his new delight consecutively dark. Stuck in the wet mire, 4,000 leagues from the 9th buried city, I thought of Troy, what we had built her for. So we're on 10. Its roots going even farther back in memory and prophecy. Highlight. Lyric recalls its origins in the brilliant original pattern of being and grieves at what is not right in the city. Recalling the way things were in the garden before the fall and the promise of eternity, it can only cast accusations at the present scene, grieve for it, or withdraw completely. Within the modern urban environment, poets necessarily feel unwelcome, for their lament and prophecy testify against the abstraction and narcissism of urbanized life. This testimony is a constant witness to the richness and depth of matter with which all of us in our childhood were in touch. Thus, the lyric is never really at home in the structured and restricted and abstract city. Stop. For the things of the body and of the heart will never be right in the city. There will always be wars and rumors of wars, greed and corruption, broken homes, deserted children, lovers betrayed, public scandal, cities like Troy and Dresden and Hiroshima destroyed, and always and everywhere destitution. The poor we will have with us always, and there will always apparently be strife and violence. Highlight. The lyric's mission then is how to sing of a diminished thing. Stop. So poets aren't welcome in the city, right? Because the city is full of greed and deserted children and broken homes and corruption and scandal and violence. And so the lyric has to figure out how to exist in the city as a diminished thing. Diminished from what? Diminished from our original sense of perfection. As John Donne writes in The Canonization, soldiers find wars and lawyers find out still litigious men, which quarrels move, though she and I do love. Thus he declares, even though we too as lovers have withdrawn from the world, we have gained its essence. We did the whole world's soul contract and drove into the glasses of our eyes, so made such mirrors and such spies, that they did all to us epitomize. Highlight. If we love, he insists, we ourselves can be the voice of the lyric in a disharmonious world and bring to it a pattern of love that is peace, a small replica of the garden ensconced in human hearts and minds. Okay, so all of this is saying that the city is awful. We've talked about the city being the place where we all live, right? We talk about this in comedy, and there's 3 kinds of comedy, and that we all live in like a purgatorial, maybe verging on an infernal realm. And that in those realms are bad things happening all the time. And she even quotes the Bible when she says, the poor we will have with us always. So how do we then sing, as she's going to say here on the next page, I think, sing the Lord's song in a strange land? How do we sing happy things? How do we sing the lyric in a place where we're not really welcome, the city? And when I say city, I just mean structure, right? I don't mean like Fort Worth or Dallas or something. I mean structure. It's very hard to be lyrical in where you have rules. Because remember, as we said yesterday or Friday, that we were not made for rules. We were made for love. Rules kind of go against who we are as like human beings. Okay, top of 11. The stages of the lyric voice are determined by this envisioned blessedness, each tending to express itself in one of 3 moments, all related to the beloved object. Did I tell you to highlight? Highlight. From the stages of lyric are determined by this envisioned blessedness, each tending to express itself in one of 3 moments, all related to the beloved object, anticipation of its coming, consummation in its presence, and lamentation at its absence, desire, fulfillment, and loss. Stop. The mood of anticipation has been expressed throughout history, in many of the Psalms, in the traditional medieval Obade, in some of John Donne's finest songs and hymns, Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, and in the 20th century, such as Yeats's Sailing to Byzantium, and Wallace Stevens' The World is Meditation, among many others. One of Sylvia Plath's best poems, Black Rook in Rainy Weather, exhibits this intense desire of anticipation within the first stage of lyric. On the stiff twig up there hunches a wet black rook, arranging and rearranging its feathers in the rain. The expectation she makes clear is not for a miracle to set the sight on fire. It is just that the rook, ordering its black feathers, can haul my eyelids up and grant a brief respite from fear of total neutrality. Miracles occur, if you care to call those spasmodic tricks of radiance miracles. The wait's begun, the long wait for the angel, for that rare random descent. Highlight. That rare random descent here, longed for but not witnessed, is most often portrayed when it does occur as the second stage, the stage of consummation, the momentary fullness of joy in the presence of the beloved or in the revelation of the supernal vision, glorious but fleeting. Stop. This miracle is what discerns in such poems such as the 23rd Psalm, John Donne's The Canonization, the Marvel's Garden, Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, and Hopkins' God's Grandeur. Highlight. The 3rd stage, lamentation, is by far the most frequently encountered in the lyric realm. Stop. Wyatt's They Flee From Me, Donne's Nocturnals upon St. Lucy's Day, Hopkins' I Wake and Feel the Fell of the Dark, Yeats's The Wild Swans at Cooley, Tate's Ode to the Confederate Dead, Richard Everhart's The Groundhog. Highlight. This dark lyric awareness of loss may be terrifying. Hopkins' exclamation, "Oh, the mind has mountains," expresses the dark of this interior incompleteness, as does Rothko's "In a Dark Time the Eye Begins to See." Jory Graham's San Sepulcro combines all 3 lyric moments. Next paragraph. In each of these stages, the lyric voice speaks as though privately, from one soul to another with plaintive urgency. Highlight. In fact, the public role for lyric poetry, it is to be feared, will never be very much in evidence in our society. Poets can be featured as a kind of decoration, as they are sometimes used in presidential inauguration ceremonies. But one fears that to overemphasize the public role of poetry is to risk losing the heart of what poets are for. Stop. So what finally are poets for? The philosopher Martin Heidegger raises this question following the challenge posed by Hölderlin some century and a half earlier in asking about poets in a destitute time. Responding to several poems on this theme by the 20th century poet Rainer Maria Rilke, Heidegger forms his response. Highlight. Poets are the only ones who can enter the abyss, he says, and bring back a wholeness into the open, so that others may apprehend it. But we would add, poets must suffer the secret longings of the human community and express its grief or delight in a strange and unfamiliar words that strain to find the original tongue. Such a language is of the soul and the viscera, not the abstract mind. It abhors sentimentality. Worldly platitudes are foreign to it. Such a language records our nobility, remembers our wisdom, and ties us to immortality. But it reminds its hearers that they are displaced persons. Stop. Okay, poets, as I've been saying all year long, are the only ones who can fall into the abyss and come back out. Okay, how do they come back out? Not sure, like literally. None of this is literal. It's all the image of the soul anyway. The four parts of the soul. So the poets they go into the abyss, which doesn't have a language because it's not of the city. It's outside in chaos. They go into the abyss and they bring back the stories of darkness, or it says, or of delight, grief or delight. But it brings the stories of grief or delight into the city. And since the city doesn't understand the language of the abyss, the poet is not understood in the city. And so we look at the poet and we're like, you're weird. Die. Am I right? I don't like poetry. It's so confusing. Well, yeah, because you speak the language of the city and the poet speaks the language of chaos. Whether that chaos be delight or grief. And so the poet gets judged. And the poet also hates sentimentality, like Hallmark cards type stuff. Any good poet, any good English teacher worth their worth is going to be like, yeah, that's beautiful for a Hallmark card. Because Hallmark card is a language, that's language that exists in the city. We can all understand it. But real poetry does not exist in the city. It cannot be found there. It's expressed there because it has to find expression somewhere. But it's not from there. It's like if we all went and moved to a different country, we could be there, but we would be totally displaced. We would feel not at home. We wouldn't know the language there. We wouldn't know the customs. We wouldn't know any of those things. As it turns out, however, the lyric voice is surprisingly sturdy. Its apparent frailty belied by an ability to move minds and hearts. As Yeats wrote, I am certainly never sure when I hear of some war, some religious excitement, or of some new manufacture, or of anything else that fills the air in the world, that it has not happened because of something that boy piped in Thessaly. The piping of the lyric brings sound and sense together in a single utterance, accomplishing a kind of hypostatic unity that Ransom has called a miracle of harmony. It addresses itself not so much to a rational faculty as to a kind of bodily intuition, which, though ultimately cognitive, so of the brain, depends upon a sensitivity keenly aware of the underlying reverberations of language. Its symbolic territory is outside the polis, the city, away from the arena of argument, and, though uttering itself from within a marred and fallen status, it longs for unfettered freedom. The state of the pilgrim in Dante's earthly paradise, where he is told he is free to follow pleasure because he only now desires the good. Stop. From this yearning issues a heightened awareness of bondage and longing, giving voice to multiple impulses that shape a culture, keeping alive a memory of home. So she's going to talk about Psalm 137 here, But I can't help but thinking about slavery. Because I just got done watching this PBS show called The Black Church. Did you guys see that? It's brand new on PBS. And it's all about how the Black Church basically saved the soul of African Americans during slavery and beyond, and even into this day. Because it's where the Lord's song could be expressed in a strange land. Think about all of the slave songs that people used to sing on the plantations. Those were songs of real pain and also real joy. The memory of the home country, the pain of being displaced, but yet that is the pursuit of something more, which is why they call the Black Church a prophetic church, a vision of the future, which is what prophecy is. So it's a lot like the Exodus, right, from Psalms 137, a poignant expression of this aching sense of exile and its intimate connection with song awakened in the poet's homelessness. So this is from the Bible. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there that they carried us away captive required of us a song. Highlight this. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Stop. But as lyric poets throughout history have discovered, the very singing of loss and exile brings heart's ease and hope of recovering home. In the midst of the forgetful city, poets recall the garden. Significant as the recollection of the original garden is, however, is still not the primal lyric memory. The lyric retains still a dim awareness of the way things were before time was, in the original pattern of being. Metaphorically, we could say that underneath all its temporal concerns is the deep current of its underground stream, a yearning for the moment of creation when the form of things existed in the divine mind, imprinting matter with a supernally joyous stamp of form. It is not the earthly garden, then, that the poet intuits as the lyric's ultimate aim, but a pre-earthly realm. One that Plato envisions with his concept of the forms, one that Dante enters in the Paradiso when he transhumanizes himself, and one that the author of Proverbs writes about as participating in creation. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning or ever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no mountains abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills, I was brought forth. And I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the habitable part of the earth, and my delights were with the sons of men. The sons of men are thus included in wisdom's scope and are called constantly to her voice. Unto you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of man. O ye simple, understand wisdom. And ye fools, be ye of an understanding heart. Hear, for I will speak of excellent things, and the opening of my lips shall be right things. For my mouth shall speak truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. It is the figure of wisdom that is speaking here, the word that participated with the Creator in the beginning. Highlight this wisdom, the true Sophia, the form of things, calls out to the sons of men, that's us, beckoning them to truth, to excellent things. This is the highest reach of the lyric, its true insight into the being of the world, whether it expresses itself as aspiration or loss. Stop. And it is this memory implied within the lyric that contains the seeds of all the poetic kind. As the center of poetic energy, lyric is the primary element in the formation of the other genres. Highlight, to go one step into the darkness beyond its lamentation is to enter the region of tragedy. To accept and work with its homelessness is to make do in the realm of comedy. To strive to reestablish the lost garden is to respond to the stirrings of epic. Further, the language of all these other genres remains at their height, unmistakably lyric. And as though these great forms were mere enlargements of the lyric insight. Stop. Bottom of 14.